What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast. He's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. We are back. New overlay, a whole new us. We're getting into a whole new season here, so we had to change it up a little bit. Scott, my man, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Just we talked a bunch before the show. A lot of draft talk before the show as we are talking about things we're hearing and things like that. Maybe that's something we'll do next week or the week after. And we'll mix in a mock draft or something as well down the line. But because we're getting down to the kind of the final stretch here. It's April 3rd as we record this on 6 p.m. On a Thursday. And in 4 weeks' time, not even 3 weeks' time.
3 weeks.
21 days, we will be an hour or two away from the 2025 NFL Draft, Christmas morning, as I like to call it. But a lot to get into today. And we're going to be talking about players we're too high on, players we're too low on. We're going to just kind of talk about that, and then we'll see where we're at. Maybe we'll talk about a trade back scenario for Lions fans as we had some NFL news come out. I'm not going to sit here and talk about jersey numbers. I don't really care too much about Jahmyr Gibbs going to 0 and so on and so forth. It will take some adjusting because Tyrion Arnold wore it last year, but I digress. But let's get into it. Players we're too high on, players we're too low on. For the 2025 NFL Draft. I'll kick it off to you. We'll start with a player that you're maybe too high on or a player that maybe you don't like as much as the consensus.
Okay, so the whole thing here is just, it's not necessarily to explain or like pick both sides of a player, but it's more like sometimes there's a player that you watch where the consensus might be much higher than where you are, and you can't ever really cross the bridge to get to an understanding of like how are others seeing this, and everywhere it's not. I'm like, so this is me as with an outlier, right? And it's cool because we're all going to be wrong about things. We're all going to see things, differently, I guess. But in every draft, there's players that you're too high on, players that you're too low on, and then it just kind of resolves itself. But like in this instance, Mykel Williams from Georgia is a player who's kind of getting, let's say, top 10 to 12 buzz. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah. I mean, throughout probably the entire portion of the draft process. I think maybe in recent week or so, it's kind of gone down to the middle teens. But overall, yeah, you're right. 10 to 12 is probably the consensus.
And he is a player who I don't love his game. Just just putting it out there. I don't love his game. But there's a bunch of context that's required in order to see him fairly for what he is as a player.
Yeah.
Georgia uses their edge guys where they do a lot of like 4-eye kind of. He plays inside the tackle a lot. So when you're lined up like that and you're stepping into the B gap all the time to spill runs outside, it's going to make you're not going to win as much, right? Like, consistently, you're not going to win. And so you have to understand the context of that. And for me, it's like, I watch Texas A&M's D-line do their stuff and they run the same kind of thing, the same defense. And then I'd look at Shamar Stewart, the way he plays, and I give him credit. Some of this is going to be me owning my own bias here. But I want to give Shamar Stewart credit and a little bit of a bump because how much they did play him inside, what they asked him to do, and it's not necessarily about him winning with speed and and quickness and all that stuff around the corner because that's really not what he's tasked to do. The same thing can be said for Michael Williams, but I don't want to give him credit for being deployed that way. Does that make sense? So I understand what Georgia's asking these guys to do, or Texas A&M, or whatever it is. He's not necessarily put in a position at the college level to be lined up outside the tackle and win that way. So finding those snaps on his film, it's not hard to do, but you got to watch a lot of film, a lot of him playing to see, all right, the Lions would deploy him as an edge player. I don't think they'd kick him inside very much at all. And what does he look like as an edge player simply rushing around the arc?
Right.
And to me, he's one of those guys who he tested a certain way at his pro day, and I think that's all over his film. I do not see, as a 43 end, you're looking for some explosiveness, some get off, right? You want to see some flexibility, you want to see agility, you want to see their bend. What's his body type?
Yeah.
All those things. I know he's a big player at 20 years old, and that's the other thing I think that probably goes in his favor is he's young, and he probably puts more mass and gets a bigger frame. I mean, he's 6'5". I want to say he was 6'5" and 260 at the combine, 34 and 3/8 arms, I believe. We're talking about a big. We're not talking about a huge guy, but we're talking about a guy with enough size where I think, size-wise, he's fine, and you could throw on a little more. But at 6'5" and 260, for him to move the way he moves, I think he's limited in some ways, athletically. So I don't know that he's got the first step explosiveness, agility. I don't know that there's a lot of that stuff evident on his tape, right?
Right.
So then it's more about what's his quickness like? What's his first step like? What does he do as a speed rush guy? And there's not a lot there, right? There's just not a lot. I think, when you look at the things that he does do, it's physical. It is, it's being strong enough at the point of attack not to get moved. So this is a guy who I think absolutely will set the edge for you, will defend the run for you, is a player who at 28, I would say, okay, but he's not a player to me, just because of some of the limitations where I would say, yeah, jump into the top 10 or 12 picks for that guy.
Right.
Athletically, I think he's limited. Obviously he's strong. He's all that stuff. That stuff's evident on tape. You can see him hold up. He's really good against the run. But the things that he doesn't do are the things where he is limited. Like there's plays where he does line up outside the tackle, and let's say it's a bubble screen going his way to the short side of the field, where that's not a lot of distance that you got to cover.
No.
And he'll see that, and he's still not able to get out to where the receiver is cutting it back inside to make he's trying to. It's he's just limited athletically. So Michael Williams is one of those guys where I struggle to see it totally. Now at 28, totally different story. Fine. This year, his best game this year was probably the Texas game, at least production wise.
Oh, 100%.
Watch the entire Texas game. He has 3 sacks in this game, but two of them are he's unblocked, and one of them is a cleanup sack. Right? He's got another hit and another hurry in that game, but we're talking about a guy he has 14 sacks in his 3 years at Georgia. He had 5.5 this year, I believe. 3 of them come in one game. Some of them are against Kelvin Banks, but Banks is a good football player, but this is, I don't think Banks is, your lock it up tackle, entering the NFL. There's reasons why he's being talked about the way he's being talked about, but that's kind of it in a nutshell with me with Michael Williams. Again, I understand at 28, if the Lions make that pick, I think everybody should be happy. He's very clearly a high floor player who's gonna defend the run, who's gonna set the edge, can do all those things. I see a player who's somewhat limited athletically and a guy who's pretty raw. And now I understand he's only 20.
Yeah.
That's where I am with him. Tell me, what am I missing?
No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head because he was a part of a deep defensive line grouping. We all understand that. There's a lot of depth at Georgia and there's a lot of talent, but he did only have 18 starts in his career and the production was up and down. And there's a lot of flashes where there's strong production and then there's games where there's very limited production. I agree. The way he sets the edge and the way he can play against the run, that's all there. And that's a perfect fit for Detroit because I think Detroit, opposite of Hutch, is consistently looking for players that can set the edge against the run. They're not necessarily looking for a guy that's always going to be in the backfield. Maybe they are, and they just haven't found that guy, but it just doesn't feel like it with the players that they've been bringing in to pair with Hutch over the time of his career. So he would make sense for us at 28. But for like the teams that are drafting in the top 10 and maybe even in the top 15, I think you're reaching a little bit because he is rough around the edges and he may only be, as good as a Peyton Turner or something like that we've seen in the past. So he would make a lot of sense for the Saints at like 9 because that's kind of their bread and butter of type of player.
Yeah.
But
that's the thing is I don't want people to come back. I mean, everybody can say whatever they want to say. I understand why he would get drafted much earlier than I think.
Yeah,
I get it. And I do. So I'm not saying he shouldn't be a top 10 pick or a top 15 pick. I'm saying I struggle to see fully why he would be. Yeah. In this class, I get it. But yeah, like he could easily be the pick at 9.
He could be.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll obviously we'll see what happens with Michael. The player for me that I just don't really get is Jared Ivey from Ole Miss. He was a guy that back in January I had gotten some texts of like from certain scouts and things, and they're like, "Hey, put a circle next to Jared Ivey's name from Ole Miss. There's going to be a lot of love for Walter Nolan, but keep tabs on Ivey. He's a freak athlete, great length, and all of those things." And you know what? They're right, 6'5", 274, but the athleticism is not there. It doesn't match. He had a terrible pro day, did not test well, did not have good explosive numbers for the vertical or broad or anything like that. And it kind of shows on tape because he pops right up out of his stance. When he goes to counter, like if he does have an explosive rep, like there was a play at the Senior Bowl where he explodes out of his stance and he's playing half man and he takes the outside shoulder and then he tries to counter inside. But as he counters and he goes for that inside swim, he's straight up. He's standing straight up. It's nothing but his chest and his ribs. It's an easy block and transition for all the premier tackles in the league. And then you just look at him in between the tackles playing, a 4-eye. He's getting knocked around. He looks like a buoy out in the middle of the lake. You know what I mean? Like he's getting knocked around. So I look at him. He ended up like 85th or 89th on my big board. And that's where I graded him. But there were people telling me he's going to be a top 50, top 60 pick. And
I was one of them.
You mentioned it a few weeks ago, as you said to me.
I did, yeah.
You were like, he might be a first-round option for some teams, and he still could be. But if he is,
no,
I just want to know, like, what am I missing with the guy? So I just don't get Jared Ivey very much. I think there's a lot of limitations with his games. He's not very active with his hands. When he is, he can be disruptive, but everything's got to be, I feel like, perfect around him for him to be successful. And he played with a lot of talent around him at Ole Miss. And I get it. We talked about that scheme a few weeks ago.
I think this is a good example of perhaps trying to give too much credit to a player because of perhaps what's being taught and what they're being asked to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll own it. What I talked about was him taking what looked like read steps.
Mm-hmm.
So his first step is he stands up, right? And there's some pad level issues there, but he stands up and he'll take a step towards the ball and not necessarily, he's not threatening a tackle or a guard, whatever, up the field at all.
Yeah.
And to me, that looks more of like a processing sort of a read step, when the reality is his first step quickness is very, very limited.
Yeah.
And he's late too.
Yep.
So those are significant problems going forward. Again, 6 weeks ago, I was talking about him being an option for the Lions at 28 before the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
That one, that's a bad take because it is. And, that's not, obviously that's not going to happen. If we get into round 3 or 4, round 3, yeah.
Right.
But, I don't think, I guess, to me, I mean, there are bad, like you're saying, it's a really good example of the buoy in the lake.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where he does look off balance.
Mm-hmm.
He can be slippery at times. I think he's more productive closer to the ball than he is further away from the ball, obviously, because he has such limitations athletically.
Yeah.
But yeah, like even watching him on film, I still struggle to see a guy as bad of an athlete as he might be. I mean, his relative athletic score is it's hard to see it. It's hard for it to be much worse.
Yeah.
It really is. So, the fact that he's able to be somewhat productive and look a little bit the way he does on film, because I still like him as a player.
Yeah.
I don't think that, I think the take I had 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, is awful at this point, but it is what it is. You live and learn.
Well, and for the people at home, the RAS score that you're talking about, this is from, and everybody in the Lions realm should know who this guy is, at MathBomb, Kent Lee Platt. He does a phenomenal job with this, tracking all this information. But Jared Ivey, he earned a 2.00 RAS score. So from 1987 to 2025, there's been 2,012 defensive ends in the database. He ranks 1610 out of 212, out of 2012. So it's bad. And like he ran a 5.15 40. Okay, whatever. 40 doesn't matter. 7.58 3-cone drill. Terrible. Shuttle drill was 4.88. No change of direction ability.
What's his 10-yard split? That's the one that is just like, oh my God, is that unbelievable?
1.84.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some defensive tackles in this class that are miles faster than him off the ball.
Yeah.
And they weigh more. I mean, he's 6'5", 274, 33.5-inch arms. Like, he looks the part on film. And then, like, you see some flashes, and then you see the testing, and you're like, he might be a guy that goes in the 5th or 6th round just because of that. So yeah, he was just a guy for me that was way lower on my board than I really thought he was going to end up being. And then when the RAS scores came out, I was like, yeah, it's game over for him. So
I was floored by the test. I thought he would be, I didn't think he was going to be like a crazy good athlete, but I didn't think he was going to be, like that.
Not like that. Not like that at all. But
wow. Yeah.
Let's go to a player that maybe we're higher on, that maybe the consensus is potentially lower on, or maybe right on par. I'm going to go with Alabama safety Malachi Moore. I've talked about him probably in the past on this show. I've certainly talked about him on Twitter. I love his skill set. I truly don't understand why he's not getting the chatter that I think he deserves compared to other safeties in this class. And I like this safety class. I've said it before. I think it's a deep class, but Malachi Moore is my 46th overall player, my second ranked safety, right behind Malachi Starks, who there's a huge gap. I think Starks is the clear-cut best safety, and then I think you can get into like the conversation of Andrew Makuba, Malachi Moore, Xavier Watts, etc. I'm not as big on Amanawore as other people, simply because the guy cannot tackle. And if my safety is going to be buzzing down and playing in the alley, you have to be able to tackle. And that's what Malachi Moore does. He tackles. And I'm a little curious, where has he tested? Because I have not come across those numbers quite yet. They're not posted. He didn't do anything at the combine, but at 5'11", 196, I think he can play as maybe as a nickel at times, because he's shown it. but the way he buzzes downhill, the way he triggers, he tackles. I love the way he covers. He gets his head around. Like there are times that he turns the wrong way, but he recovers well.
Yeah.
He can play that center field role, but he's probably best as a split field kind of safety where he's splitting the field with another guy. And like I mentioned, he's going to buzz down, so you can do a bunch of different things with him. Robber, again, covering the slot, whatever. And I think Malachi Moore would be a great fit for the Lions, especially at pick 60 if he's there. And I wonder, is the league going to be higher on him than the draft media? But I see people posting mock drafts on Twitter, and they're putting him out there, and he's like a 7th round pick. And I'm just like, that makes zero sense to me because I think he is far and away better than being a 7th round pick. So I'm just curious where he'll end up, but I definitely know I'm higher on him than probably anybody else in the business.
And team captain for 2 years, that's pretty good stuff. I think. Do we want to say he's a little better in the box than he is maybe further away from the ball?
I would agree with that, and that's probably why I like him so much because I've talked about it. I like physical players.
And the idea, I mean, the way the NFL is right now with so much nickel and dime, that kind of player who's effective against the run, who can survive in coverage, is important. They're valuable. My guess is his pathway to production early on is on special teams and as a backup. But I haven't seen any testing either, so I don't know any of his 40 time or any of that kind of stuff. But I don't think you're looking at a super limited player either.
Yeah.
I think he's fine. He's okay. It's interesting because this class of safeties, he's starting at the top. You mentioned Emma. He's like your prototypical wannabe tough guy kind of player.
Yeah.
He's going to knock the snot out of you when you're in a vulnerable position.
Right.
Right. And then he'll stand over you and make it and let you know what he just did. But if you ask him to, step into the alley and take on, SEC running back, he's not really going to be wanting to do that.
No.
And then flaws in coverage and all that stuff. I mean, I like Moore. Again, it's an important position to be able to do a variety of things and survive in a variety of ways.
Yeah. And he just reminds me so much of Eddie Jackson, who was with the Bears for a long time, and he was productive and he was a later pick. And I just look at Moore and I'm like, this is going to be a guy that's in the league for 7, 8, 9 years, and he's going to be productive. And I think it's important to talk about him a lot because one, we all know the ties that the Lions have had in the past with Alabama players.
Yeah.
And then we know that they need another safety. They need safety depth, and they've got to pay Kirby. But if they don't come to an agreement, you got to have somebody waiting in the wings. So,
well, you're gonna. So we're gonna have a little conversation about: do you want to pay Kirby Joseph? And if not, there's a player who I think will be available at pick 60. And you mentioned him earlier, Andrew Makuba.
Mm-hmm.
He is a free safety out of Texas.
And your guy now.
Yes, this is the player that I'm probably too high on. Although when I watch this guy, his instincts to find the ball in coverage are just ridiculous. So Moore and Makuba are completely contrarian players. To me, Makuba needs to be further away from the ball, reading the field and using his instincts and athleticism, because he ran 4.4 range. He can cover lots of ground. But the thing that stands out with me watching him is his ability to get out of his own responsibility and make plays on the ball, jumping routes where it's not necessarily even his coverage responsibility. But it happens over and over where he'll, there's really nobody for him to cover, and he's going to backpedal and take the perfect angle and make this diving pick kind of thing. You see those a lot with him. Really good ball skills, really good athlete. The problem is that you're looking at a guy who I want to say is like 5'11" and maybe 185 range.
Yeah, he's thin.
Oh, so you're not going to ask him to come up and play in the box, period. You're not, because I don't think he can survive that way. But for just asking a player to figure out what's happening in front of him, understanding coverage, understanding where the ball's going to go. There are times when it's like, I don't want to, this is going to sound ridiculous, please take it this way. But we all know what Luke Kuechly looked like at times as a Panther, where it's just like sometimes he knew where the ball was going to go.
Right
as it was being snapped. Mukuba feels like that at times, where that's just uncanny that he is in some place on the field and he finds himself elsewhere because of what's happening in front of him, and his ability to process what's going on is just silly. So then the entire conversation, and I get it if you want to pay Kirby Joseph, but the Lions are not going to be able to pay everybody going forward.
Yeah. This
is a guy, to me, who you would take at, say, pick 60. I think I would value him significantly higher than that. I'm not saying he's a first rounder. I'm not saying that. But, if you got him at pick 60, I think you'd be pretty happy. But he would allow you to move on from Kirby Joseph because his skill set is redundant with Kirby Joseph. I don't think anybody would say Kirby Joseph is a good tackler. I don't think Mukuba is a good tackler either. He's a missile. He's going to hit you hard, but it doesn't.
Well,
he's not technically a good tackler. I think that you'll see misses with him. He might struggle at times to get players to the ground simply because he's small. And then the concerns are, can he hold up? Can he play, a full season? Can he hold up with a smaller frame? But from a coverage standpoint, from a concept standpoint, his understanding of the game, his football IQ, it's ridiculous to watch. He's a very fun player to watch. I understand the size limitations and all that stuff, but if you like safeties who can excel in coverage and make plays in coverage, he's ridiculous.
He makes some acrobatic catches, man. He makes some great adjustments on the ball. He comes down with it. He ran a 4.45. He had a 1.53 split. The pro comparison as far as like size and athletic testing goes, he's pretty comparable to Julian Blackmon, who was on the Colts, and I believe he just recently signed with the Panthers. So a little thinner, but these are guys that make plays, and you need a guy that can maybe play that center field role at times. And I think I'm with you. I think Mukuba would be a great fit. And if you took him at 60, you wouldn't hear me complain, because I know that the Lions need another piece at safety. It's just, they do. And I wonder, I just wonder, is this a position, as we get ready to kind of wrap up the show and things like that, looking at, pick 28 or moving back and maybe going from pick 28 to 34, 35, somewhere in there, is a player like Xavier Watson option out of Notre Dame, or the two safeties that we've already talked about? I wonder, how are they putting this board together? Because we've so much talked about, to great length, defensive end, defensive tackle, defensive end, defensive tackle. And it's like, I genuinely do not believe that's the direction they go unless their guy is 100% there at 28 or within reaching distance of 28. So you're talking 26 or 25. And I just don't know if you're going to be able to do that. I just don't know.
I don't know either. I would love for the Lions to trade up to go get their guy.
Yeah.
Right. Whoever that is.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's practical, because in this class, it's a weird class. I think there are three absolute rock star premium players, and that's Abdul, Carter, Travis Hunter, and Ashton Janty. I mean, I think that's, and then after that, it's like, all right, well, some of these guys with the great with the high character stuff like Jalen Walker, they're going to go higher than we think.
Yeah.
Simply because you know what you're getting, and you're getting a high caliber human being, and player, all that stuff. But after that, like, we want to force these tackles into the top 10, and they're not necessarily going to go there. So, it's tough to see. It's tough to see a really good edge player fall to the point where the Lions could go get him.
Mhm.
But if you told me that the Lions were going to burn a first round pick in the future to go get a premium player in this draft, I would say, yeah, I understand it because you can't pay everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So we just talked about maybe not being able to pay Kirby Joseph. Maybe going up and taking a swing is not necessarily the worst move in the world because you don't have to pay. You're gonna have to pay that guy, but you won't have to pay next year's first rounder.
Right. Right.
I wouldn't like to do that because Brad Holmes is pretty good at drafting these players. So the other way is to slide down a little, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Specifically, there was a trade made today.
Yep. Yeah, the Patriots trade away Joe Milton, and that's kind of been a heavy rumor on the internet. I know you can't believe everything you read, but when it's coming from reliable people, it's worth considering. And the Patriots traded away Joe Milton, and they swapped some picks with the Dallas Cowboys. And the rumor mill has kind of been like the Patriots. They've gained. We all know that when you make a trade and you involve draft picks, there's that point system, and it's the Jimmy Johnson point system or whatever the hell it is. And it's one of those things where they gained additional points and now they could potentially leverage themselves with their second round pick because of the capital they gained to move up into the first round again. So they're going to pick at 4, whoever that is, or maybe they move down, who knows.
Yep.
But then they take their second round pick and they move up into the back end of the first round. And a team like maybe Washington is intriguing, maybe Detroit is certainly intriguing. I mean, Washington traded away a bunch of picks to get Debo, Laramie Tunzel.
Yeah.
So they've spent some capital. Maybe they want to move back. But the question then becomes, do the Patriots move up and do the Lions move back? Because the Lions kind of have a gap with some picks. And they could maybe bridge that gap with a third rounder or a fourth rounder. And I wonder if you move back to 34, 35, 36, somewhere in there, and you move with the Patriots, now you got the luxury to do whatever you want. Maybe you do take Luther Bird in there. Maybe you take a Malachi Moore or Andrew Makuba, Xavier. I mean, the list goes on.
See, I could see the Patriots coming up for a player like Burton.
I could see that too.
That would make some sense. And then, the Lions, it feels like they'd be picking up like a third rounder in that scenario, not an early third rounder.
Yeah.
But, well, maybe, I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what the point system looks like for them to move back to do that.
Yeah, I should have opened that before the show. My bad.
It's all. I mean, it's the same kind of conversation. You're getting more capital in a decent spot of the draft, and maybe, maybe it's that you would grab, say, the Patriots third, and you'd have to flip them back, a fourth kind of thing. Whatever. But the idea of giving Brad Holmes an extra third rounder to work with is intriguing to me.
Yeah, no, the Patriots have 2 third-round picks, by the way.
What's that?
The Patriots have 2 third-round picks. They've got 69 and 77.
All right, so let's go pick 77, right? So the Lions would have, say, pick 34 and pick 77 kind of thing.
Yeah.
I like that. That pick at pick 77 could be valuable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could move pick 77 and pick 102 and maybe get up to pick 65 if you wanted to. Whatever.
Yeah. Yep. The Patriots' second round pick is pick 38.
Okay.
So, I mean, either way, though,
that's 10 spots. I think that maybe you might be getting more than pick 77 then. Maybe you're getting that earlier third.
Yeah, maybe you're getting that third round pick, and then you're getting a late fifth or something like that.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think that would work. I mean, it would be very intriguing. And I mean, we could go through for hours on every single option that the Lions are going to do. We definitely could. And I think that's what maybe we'll do next week. Maybe I'll find a way to design this, and we'll do a mock draft or something along those lines. But it'll be very interesting. A lot of things happening right now as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. And it is, as we said before the show, it is becoming this one even like last year was a little unpredictable, but by the time we got to it, I had a good feeling about where guys were going. This year, I have no idea. I don't even know what's going on at 2.
That's the thing. Like last year, I feel like we knew that, there were going to be quarterbacks going, and we knew Neighbors was going to go early. We knew Harrison was going to go early. We knew O'Dunn's was going to go early. All that stuff. We kind of had some clarity on a bunch of that stuff. Who's going at 2? Like, I mean, I think there's definitely a possibility that the top 5 of this draft looks absolutely wild when we look back on it after draft night, after Thursday night. Like I could see the Giants just sitting there and taking Janty.
Yeah.
It'd be such a Giants thing to do after moving on from Barkley. It really would be. But then like, does Abdul Carter fall to like 5, 6? Does Travis Hunter fall to 5 or 6?
That's what I struggle with. I'm like, dude, we might end up seeing a very similar draft to what we saw in, 2020, 2021 when Penei Sewell and Micah Parsons came out.
Yeah.
Those guys went like 7 and 10.
Or 11 or 12, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, no way should they go that low in the draft, but they ended up going that low. And this could be the same type of draft. I mean, when you have bad quarterback drafts, it becomes a lot less predictable because you can't just be like, oh, quarterback. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
so it's bad quarterback draft. You have a bad offensive tackle draft.
Yep.
You don't have a great top of the first round wide receiver draft. You have some elite tight ends, but are they going to go that early? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the players that give teams a high floor while being players that they know they can count on those guys are going to kind of rise.
Yeah.
As the process rolls on the next couple weeks.
Yeah. 100%. It's going to be interesting. We're going to see it. We're going to keep breaking it down right here on the Detroit Lions podcast. As I do every week, you guys, of course, can rate, review, and subscribe to the Detroit Lions podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other podcast platforms. And of course, you can follow us on X at Russ NFL Draft, at Bischoff_Scott. You can also give the Detroit Lions podcast a follow on there as well. So we'll be back next week, probably similar time, similar place, doing the same thing, talking football, talking Lions, talking draft. But he's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. This has been Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast.